Hello and welcome back to part 8 of my tutorial series showing you how to make your own cartoon from start to finish with Toon Boom Harmony Premium. In the last video we covered deformers, and if you've been following along with this tutorial series you have seen that we are building a character rig as well. This video is just going to be dedicated to auto patches and cutters, and then in the next video we're going to be going back to our character rig. So what are auto patches? Now auto patches are mainly used for joints between limbs, but they can be used for anything where you want to merge two body shapes together. So let me show you how it works. So I'm gonna enable these two shapes, and we've just got two simple sausage shapes here. So we've got one there and we've got one there. So let's pretend that this is an arm. So let's pretend that this is the lower arm, and let's pretend that this is the upper arm. So generally when you're building a character rig, there's going to be an instance where you want this whole arm to be able to move in two parts, but you don't want this line separating it out. And this is just the edge of the line for the upper arm, so we want that to be hidden. So to do that, we're going to use a node called the Autopatch. So if I go down to the node library and search Autopatch, we can bring that up to here, or you can do it by pressing enter like I've shown you before and do it that way. So an autopatch is essentially the fill up until the line edge here. It's different from the color because the color comes up to the middle of the line here and goes underneath it, but the auto patch just comes to the edge of the line here. So if I attach this auto patch to shape 2, which is the lower arm, and let's just rename this lower arm actually just to make it a little bit more clearer. So if I take this lower arm and I attach it to the auto patch, and then I move the auto patch down to the composite, you can see now that that line has disappeared. When I rotate this, it's one shape, which is what we want. And now the reason that I've put this on the other side of the upper arm is because, as I mentioned in the previous videos, everything on the left side of the composite appears in front and everything on the right side appears behind. I've put that auto patch in front of the upper arm. So essentially what's happened is the upper arm is now sandwiched between the lower arm and the auto patch of the lower arm. However, we're not going to do it this way. I don't think it's the best way of doing it, because if you've got a lot of body parts that you want to merge together, it can get a little bit messy, especially if you want to be moving body parts in the z-axis, which is towards and away from the camera. So if I take this lower arm here and I move it behind the upper arm, and I did that by pressing Alt and up arrow, and make sure your cursor is over this window as well. And if I come up to coordinates and control points and I look at the z-axis under the position and I just move it back and forth, there it's 0, which is the position we created it at. And if I press Alt up, that moves it back in the z-axis by 0.001, and that's B for back. If I go in the opposite direction, F for front. And if we come up to here and press this plus button and we go and open this top window, and then I select the lower arm and I select the translate here, I can actually move this back in the top view as well. And if we come back to the camera, you see that it's actually gotten smaller because we've moved it back and it's taken into account that perspective. If you didn't want it to change size and maintain its shape as you move it back, you can click this button up here, maintain size. So then if I come back to the top view and I move it back, you can see that it's actually getting bigger as we move it back so that it maintains the size. And also if I come back to here and select perspective, so when you move things back in z-axis, it is actually physically moving back in 3D space, because in this perspective view, if we hold Control and Alt and we move around, you can actually see that this arm is in 3D space and it is a flat 2D shape. So if I were to move that back again and then come back into the perspective, you can see that that has actually moved back. So don't worry too much about that for now. It's just something I wanted to mention quickly before we move forward. So I'm gonna close that window and I'm gonna close that window, and we're gonna come back into our camera view. So yeah, if I move it back by pressing Alt and up, which moves it back, this line reappears, which is not something we want because when we're animating it, there will probably be instances where you want to be moving different body parts in front of and behind one another. So when we bring in all these auto patches, it's going to get a little bit messy, so we're going to do it a different way. Let's get rid of that for now. Now, if you remember from previous videos, we made the line in the line sublayer. We made the color in the color sublayer. So if we go into this drawing here, you can see that we've got the line art separate from the color art, just like we've done before. So let's go back into this camera view and we're going to separate them out. So how do we do that? We press enter and we search line art and we plug that in there. And now you can see that the color art has disappeared because we've told Toon Boom that we only want the line art to be displayed. Now we're going to do enter again and we are going to search for color art and we're going to plug that in, and then we are going to plug that down next to it. So now the color art appears as well as the line art, but you can see that this line has gotten thinner, or it appears to have gotten thinner, and that's because the color art is now in front of the line art. And if you remember me saying the color comes up to the middle of the line. So we just need to change the order of that by moving this to the right. What we are going to do, we're going to control and paste this composite, and we're going to plug the color art and the line art into this just to make it more organized. So now essentially what you've got here is the same as what we've got here. So we want to get rid of this line, and this is where we bring in cutters, which is essentially a mask. It's Toon Boom's name for a mask. And you might be familiar with masks if you use different art softwares, but if you're not familiar with the mask, let me just quickly explain how they work. So I've made these two new shapes. So if we bring in our cutter again, so if I move this shape over that one, it behaves normally. However, if we bring in this cutter and I'm just going to plug it into shape 1, there's 2 ports here. One port is just for the shape that we want to be masked, and the other port is for what the shape is going to be masked by, and you can see that there's a little mask icon there. So if we want this shape to be masked by this shape, and that means we only want that shape to appear inside of this shape. So you can pull another cable from here, just make sure that cable is intact, and then you can plug that in there, but you can see nothing's happened. And when we move this shape over here, it appears to go behind this shape, but that's because by default it's inverse masked. So if I go to this mask icon by here and I double click it, you'll see that the colors invert. And now this shape has disappeared, and that's because it's now successfully masked to shape 2. So if I move it over here, you can see that it only appears in that shape. So that's how you mask objects to one another with that cutter node. So again, just remember that this is the object that you want to be cut, so it just passes through there, and this is the object that you want it to be cut by, and this is represented by this dashed line here. So let's delete all that for now, and let's go back to what we were making before. And that's what we want to do with this upper arm. So we want the line of this upper arm to be inverse masked by the auto patch of this lower arm. So it might start sounding complicated, but when you do this a few times, you'll get used to it really quickly. So let's bring back an auto patch. Let's bring in a cutter as well, and I'm going to plug that cutter in there, and then I'm going to connect the lower arm to the auto patch, and then we're going to plug that into there. You can see that the line has completely disappeared, and if I move this, the line is inverse masked, which is what we want. Fantastic! But wait a second, what if I move this lower arm in the z-axis and I move it towards us? Uh-oh, the line appears, and we don't want that to happen. Well, the way we fix that is we do the exact same thing, but we do the opposite. So to do that, just like we did before, we're going to get our color art, we're going to get our line art, we're going to copy and paste this composite, and now we're going to get the auto patch for the upper arm. We're going to plug that into there. We want the line art of this lower arm to be cut by the auto patch of this upper arm. So we plug that into the line art, and we plug the auto patch into the mask port. So now when I move the lower arm in the z-axis by pressing Alt up and down, that line stays hidden. So that's working all hunky-dory until we start bringing it up here, and then you can see we run into a problem, and that's because we've merged our shapes together. So this line stays inverse masked. It's the auto patch of this arm. That doesn't look good, because if this was a limb of your character and this was the forearm, if you bring it up to here, you want a line to show down here. Well, to fix that, let's go to our lower arm, and we are going to go into the drawing view of that arm, and we're going to go into the line view, and this is where the overlay art sublayer comes into play. So I'm going to choose the select tool, and I'm going to take this line, I'm going to press Ctrl C, I'm going to come over to the overlay layer and I'm going to paste it there. I'm going to come over to the eraser tool, and I'm just going to delete a little lower than the halfway point of this circle, so somewhere around there. Now you can see when I cut that off, that line goes flat, so you can fix that by going into the tool properties for the eraser and then click this button here and make it rounded. So now when we erase that, it's a rounded end instead of a flat one. So we're going to take this section, we're going to simply delete these parts. So now we've got our overlay, our line art, and our color art. We're going to come back to the camera view. So now we want our overlay art to be red, because at the moment we've only got the line art and the color art. So just like before, we're going to search for overlay and we're going to plug that in, and we're going to put that over the line art. And now this is not getting affected by the auto patch mask of the other arm because it hasn't got a cutter node attached to it. So now if I move this lower arm and I bring it up, you can see that we've got a nice looking arm crease right there. And we also want to do, like we did again, we want to do the opposite for the upper arm. So if I move that behind, you can see that that's not taken effect because there's no overlay yet for the upper arm. So let's fix that. So we'll come up to the upper arm, we'll go into the drawing, and we'll copy the line into the overlay, and this time we are going to erase this bottom section here. So let's delete that, and then we can just control and paste this overlay. We don't need to create it every time, and I'm going to plug that, put it over the line art. So now you can see when I move this one, we've got a nice little crease there as well. So every time you want to merge things together, you don't have to keep creating the color art, line art, auto patch, cutter, overlay, composite. You can simply take this, and this will make it a little bit neater as well. Press Ctrl G, that will make it into a group, and then you can make this into a group as well. And we're going to rename these, so we'll call this upper arm merge. We can call this lower arm merge. So now everything is a little bit neater, and you can just control and paste these as necessary and just plug them in without having to remake stuff. Also, something else you can do, so if we come up to this tab here and we click the library, right click this Harmony Premium library, and then we'll click right to modify so that we can go into it. And the library is just where you can store pretty much anything, whether it's a character rig or a background rig or a prop, but you can also put nodes in there as well. And this Harmony Premium library is saved in your documents folder, but you can make a brand new library and choose where the file destination will be. But yeah, if I take this and I press Ctrl C, come up to here and press Ctrl V, and we're just going to call it Autopatch merge and press OK. Now every time you make a brand new character, you can just simply take this and just drag it into your node view, so you don't have to keep making it every single time. However, if you are starting off and you're a beginner, I would just make it the way we've been doing it, just to get the practice to know how it works. So I've done an upper arm and I've done a lower arm. I'm just going to do one more. I made this earlier. Let's enable this. And let's pretend this is the body of our character. So we're going to do the exact same thing that we did to merge the arms, but this time we're going to do it with the body as well. So the place we want the merge to happen is around this area. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a peg for the entirety of that arm. So let's just call that arm master for now. And I'm just going to place that arm behind the body. So yeah, we want the merge to happen here. So we want this to be blended together and the line to come up to about here. So in order to do that, I am going to take this merge here and I'm going to copy and paste it, and then I'm going to plug it into there, and then I'm going to take this arm. So this is going to be the auto patch. So if we come in here by pressing this arrow, you can see this is what we've made before. and this left port here is the auto patch, and this right port is just for all the art sublayers. That one there, art sublayers, and that one is the auto patch. And as well, if you hover over it, you can actually see that it says color art, line art, and overlay, so you don't have to go into it. So let's take cable from here, let's plug that into there. So now if I move this arm master behind the body, it's merged, but obviously this line is broken because we haven't done an overlay for it. So let's do exactly what we did before with the arms. So we're going to take that, we're going to Control C, Control V into the overlay. We can turn on our bulb icon as well to see the other lines, and let's just bring it about up to here, and we can do the same for the other side, and we'll just delete that line, come back. So now that is merged nicely with that arm, and now we're going to bring that arm back in front of the body, and it's not merged, so we need to do the exact same thing where we did the opposite. The port of this arm is already taken up by the auto patch of this lower arm. So if I take this and I plug it into there, it replaces the old one, but we want this upper arm to be merged by both the lower arm and also the body, so it's being merged by multiple objects. So we can do that one of two ways. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this group, and I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to select ungroup, and that will just bring it back to how we had it before. So this line art, again, we want it to be cut by both the auto patch of the body and the lower arm. And something we forgot to do, so if I come into the upper arm, and now I'm just going to erase for the overlay layer, and then we want it to be merged by both. So the way we can do that is we can either put another cutter in under the line art, and we can bring that in and plug it in there, so now you can see it's merged nicely. Or probably an easier way is you can make another composite, and for when you've got multiple auto patches, like in this instance where we want the body and the lower arm auto patches to mask the line, we can just plug that into there, and we could just put that auto patch above the composite as well, and we can put this back in the group. So now you've got two auto patches feeding into this composite and outputting as one. And now you can see that it is merged with this, and if I select this arm master, bring it behind, you've got that line there. Then if I bring it in front of, got that line there. However, there's a little bit of a problem here, and the reason this is happening is because the line art is inverse masked by the body, and we've got the overlay showing. But if you remember, we actually erased this lower part of the arm here so that we could accommodate for the crease for the lower arm. So the way I fix that is, if I bring this up here, you can see this is working nicely. And if you're on a front-facing character, or a front quarter, or a side view, then you won't actually need an overlay for this arm, because you're always going to have the forearm in front of the back arm. So it's going to be like that. So if I go into that arm, and I take the line art, and I paste it back on, and I'm just going to keep this section normal, and then I'm going to keep this as a whole piece. So now this works fine in front of that torso. And if I bring it all the way over the character, which is something you'll probably need to do for like a side view, it's looking pretty good. So there's not going to really be an instance where you have that lower arm behind the upper arm unless you've got a back view, and in that case the whole arm would be behind the body like that. So what I do is, I've talked about drawing substitutions in the last video. So what I like to do is I come up to drawing substitutions, and I'm going to press Alt-Shift-D to make a duplicate. And in this drawing, I will be erasing the bottom section. So that works for the back view, and then if you want to do a front view, and you don't want to have this issue here where this being cut off, you can just switch back to the normal drawing, so it's nice and flush again. So that's how you use auto patch merge systems and cutters. So one very last thing I wanted to mention before I fade is how you would mask objects inside of one another. For example, say you wanted to have a tattoo on this arm. So I've just made this object. I'm actually gonna ungroup this for the time being, and let's pretend this is a tattoo, okay? And we're gonna take a cutter. So you might think the best way to do it was to make an auto patch and then use the auto patch of the upper arm to mask that object inside the line. That's inverse mask, so let's double click that, and then you see it moves in between the lines inside of the color, and that's okay. But when we go into render, you'll see that there is this slight pink color showing through, and the reason for that is because when we're doing it in OpenGL view, this is called, it's in vector, so the closer you get, it maintains its detail. However, in render view, it renders as a bitmap image because you can't have the video file be vector, so it's going to be a resolution of 1080 or 4K, whatever you set it as. So there's going to be this anti-aliasing, which is this faded edge where it goes semi-transparent, and so you're not going to have this clean black and blue color. So the way you can fix that is, instead of having it masked by the auto patch, we're instead going to have it masked by the color. So we're going to plug that in there, and then we're going to place it in between the line and the color art. So now the line is over that shape, but it's also being masked by the color. So if we go into the render now, it's a nice clean mask. And actually, with these art nodes, if you're just using an art node and you're not using any art sublayers, you can actually plug whatever you want the object to be masked by directly into the art node. So when you drag it to the left, you'll see this mask icon appear. So you don't even have to create that cutter in the first place, but that just works for art nodes and not for these art sublayers. I know there has been a lot of information to take in this video, so I hope I explained it okay and everything made sense, but I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions, you can leave them down in the comment section below, or you can ask me live over on Twitch, where I stream this stuff 5 days a week. If you enjoyed the video and you found it helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe. Your support really does go a long way, and if you want to be notified of any future videos, you can click that notification bell. Thanks again. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!